Okay, so today is lesson 6. I hope everybody had a really good long weekend. I've seen almost everybody has submitted assignment 1, which is excellent. So I will start marking those within the next day or two. Should have them marked certainly before our class next week. So what are we going to do today? We're going to have 2 lessons on application security because it's a really important topic. There's too much for us to cover over one class. So we're going to do kind of part 1 of authentication and authorization today. And then it's going to be a little bit weird because we're going to pick this back up again in 3 weeks. So this is week 6. Next week in class, we're going to have a midterm test. The following week, obviously, is your reading week. You get a week off, and then it will be back in lesson 8, 3 weeks from now, that we carry on and complete our authentication and authorization lesson. Yes, Mihir. So good question. I was just about you're leading right into where I was going. So next week's midterm exam. So it will be done in class time. So the exam will open at 11. It will close at 2 p.m. You should be signed into the WebEx room. That way you can be here when I go over all the requirements and instructions. And also at any time during the exam, you can use the chat to ask a question, either privately or for the whole class. So I will respond using the chat. So the midterm it's going to be a practical test. So there are no question and answers. So you're just going to be building a small project, and there will probably be multiple versions of the exam. We have a large class with 39 students, so not everybody will get the exact same exam. And it will be focused on the fundamentals of what we've been doing so far in the course. So using models, views, and controllers, making customizations, and it may include a little bit around security. Next week, yep, I know, Yulia, sorry. Time goes so fast, and every semester of your program, it probably seems to go even faster. And if you are watching this lesson and normally you do the lesson asynchronously, you cannot do the midterm asynchronously. So you should be signed in to the WebEx session at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time next week to do the exam. It is not a take-home, do it on your own time exam. Everybody needs to be doing the exam during the same window, and you should be signed in so that you can ask questions. So we're focusing on the basics. The format of the midterm exam will be fairly similar to the format of the final exam. Again, it's going to be 3 hours during our Tuesday time slot, and it will be an all practical exam. So you'll be coding. You will be expected to use GitHub during the exam. You will not need to use Azure. And I will be asking you through the exam every 30 minutes to commit your code, so I can see the progression of your work through the exam. Are there any questions about the midterm? I believe it's worth 15% of your grade. Yeah, you'll be able to use a local server. You will have the full 3 hour from 11 a.m. till 2 p.m. Yes, Attila, you can use a local database. I might also provide a database for you. You will not have to use Azure at all. So you'll either be using your local database, or I may decide to put a database up on a web host that I use, and I'll provide the credentials that everybody can use. I haven't decided yet which way I'm going to do it. So I haven't actually created the exam yet. Was thinking about it this morning as I was waking up what we're going to be doing for it. But you will not have to use Azure. So I will be sure to open the WebEx room a bit early next week. I'll be sure to open it by 10:50 so you can sign in. And then I will go over the instructions right at 11 a.m. but I'm only going to repeat the instructions once, so you obviously want to be here by 11. Does anybody else have any other questions about midterm exam? Okay, thanks, Manjinder and Mahir. Also, just one word, just a reminder. Let's see, I'll just pull this up. I know you did have an assignment due over the long weekend, so normally I tend not to check emails a lot over the long weekend. Sorry, over the weekend. I did because you had your assignment due. I did respond to as many emails as I could. But just a reminder that generally I'm not on my computer 7 days a week. So typically, if you email over a weekend, like I had some students asking me to do WebEx sessions over the weekend. I'm sorry, but I just don't work 7 days a week, so I'm not going to be able to do. I can't. I do have some flexibility about scheduling additional office hours, but that's never going to be on weekends. Just so you know, because I did get a few requests for that over the weekend. Okay, so we're going to look at adding security into our project. So just before we do, so what we're going to do today, we're going to look at the OWASP project. We'll maybe do that in a bit. We're going to explore some of the components that come with the identity libraries in ASP.NET. Okay, fair enough, Julia. And then we're going to go ahead and start implementing some security, first at a really basic level and then a little more advanced, so we can start to control access to different resources in our online store. So before we do that, if you can jump into the lesson 6 folder, and there's an item here, poll, but it's a different type of poll. Whoops, bear with me, I will activate it. Okay, so the usual poll link. So go here. So pollev.com. Rich Freeman 521. What do you think about when you think of web application security? Put in, and you can answer multiple times if you want. Put in a word or a phrase. What do you think about when you see that the phrase web application security? All right, so we're seeing lots of important ideas here, and obviously we can see some of the ones that are most prevalent in people's minds. People are thinking about data, probably first and foremost, protection of data. We're concerned with privacy. We're concerned with hacking attempts. And then we can see some things related to types of hacking. So, for example, we've got injection, we get theft over here. And then some of the tools that we have for this also are mentioned here, which is great. So things like session management, validating, strong passwords, having secure storage, preventing attacks, using tokens, using OAuth, hashing, two-factor authentication. So we've got a lot of sort of tools in our toolbox, and even though we're not security experts, this is more and more a fundamental part of what application developers do, especially on the web when we're building applications that are on the public internet, right? We're very susceptible to these things, and we have a lot of responsibility to follow best practices. So I'll leave this word cloud up. I'm going to leave this tab open because we're probably going to come back here and refer to a lot of these things. And fortunately, the Microsoft Identity Framework, it addresses a number of these concerns, and it includes a number of these features, things like strong passwords, two-factor authentication, session management, SQL injection. A lot of these things are going to be built into the security infrastructure that Microsoft gives us. So we'll leave this and we'll come back here. So this has taken on a bigger and bigger part of this course. Years ago when I taught this course, we used to do one lesson on security. Now we've bumped it up to 2. And we also should have a look at, because you've mentioned a number of these things. Has anybody heard of this project? I want to take a minute to take a quick look at it. Has anybody heard of the OWASP Top 10 or have any idea what it is? Okay. Well, this is a good thing to know. This would be a common interview question for a web developer, is what is the OWASP project? So I was introduced to this by a former student of ours. After he graduated, he worked in a number of application security roles, and he was actually had a management position at the Royal Bank of Canada in their application security division. He's since moved on. He's working for another web security firm, application security firm. But he said, you really need to show students and make them aware of the OWASP Top 10. So I'm just going to open it up. We can have a look. So this is a nonprofit foundation that's dedicated to the security of software. And it largely is focused on web application security. So that's what the WASP, Web Application Security Project, stands for. So every few years, they publish a list. They typically do it every 3 or 4 years, where they list the most common application security risks. And they categorize them, and they explain what some of these vulnerabilities look like and how do we prevent them. So you can see here was the list from 4 years ago. And our current list today, these are the 10 most common. And you can see just how common. So in their tests, 94%, that's huge, had some form of broken access control, which is absolutely massive. And if we go in and look, we can actually see a description. So what is broken access control? What does this actually mean? So in the OWASP website, so they do some statistical analysis, and they explain, so what this is. So here's a description. This is supposed to enforce policies so users cannot act outside of their permissions. And failures typically lead to unauthorized disclosure of information, modification, or destruction of data outside a user's limits. And then they list specific problems that they've found. So things like being able to modify the URL in order to access a resource that we shouldn't, being able to view someone else's account, missing access controls on APIs, elevation of privilege user, being able to act when they're not logged in. So these are all common things. And then they show you mitigation strategies, right? How do we prevent this? And they even give us some different scenarios in code. One of the other big ones that was mentioned was SQL injection. Again, 94% had some sort of injection. So we're not properly validating or filtering, or we're using non-parameters calls to database, for example, and how to prevent. Yeah, really high. You would, Scott, in 2021, I'm kind of surprised it's that high as well, but there it is. So a number of the tools, so I mentioned this project for a couple of reasons. As I said, number one, it's commonly used in industry in terms of making sure we're following best practices and staying up to date on what are the common vulnerabilities. Number two is the identity framework we're going to use in ASP.NET. It takes care of it reduces a number of these risks. So we may come back and refer to some of these vulnerabilities as we're implementing different parts of the identity framework in our project. So it's useful to know, again, common interview question as well for a new developer. So we'll dive into using identity in a minute. Just going to do a quick walkthrough of kind of what it looks like. Not a big PowerPoint. These slides are on Blackboard for you to reference. So where does identity fit here? There's sort of two layers to it. So here we've got our web application at the top, connecting and talking to our database. So right now we've got this layer at the top and this layer at the bottom. And we've really got, identity provides a couple of layers. The first layer is a list of what it calls manager classes. So we have, for example, a manager class for administering the user accounts. That'll handle things like registration, login, two-factor authentication, etc. The role manager is for administering roles and permissions. So the user manager is around identities, and the role manager is around authorization and permissions. And so these classes are part of the identity core library. The other component that sits between the identity core and the database is the identity entity framework. So identity framework is our data access library that lets our application talk to a database. And then we have a special identity entity framework library that's all around dealing with identity. So it's got a store for both users and roles. So we can perform both authentication and authorization. There's a good tutorial series from Microsoft. I put the link up here. So this is a good reference in terms of documentation. And it just sort of, we're going to do a lot of these things in this tutorial together in class, but the link is here for a reference. If you want to go and follow the official documents, the tutorial is here. So I've just sort of adapted this so it can fit into our online store. Now, it's really important that we know the difference. Again, really good interview question for a junior developer. We've got two different security concepts here. We've got authentication and we've also got authorization. They're related, but these mean different things. What's the difference between authentication and authorization? Anybody want to take a stab at explaining the difference? Okay, yes, Attila, we can use a password, that's true.
Yes, so authentication is based, focus on my identity, so I am who I am.
Yep.
Authorization, what I can do.
Absolutely, that's a great description. So authentication is about identity and authorization is about permissions. So really authentication is sort of the first level, right? It's providing a credential so we know who the user is. And some applications, we've only got authentication. We don't necessarily have that second level of authorization. We may not have different levels of roles and permissions. It's simply you're authorized or you're not. Authorization is that second level. Once we know who you are, you've authenticated who you are, we then decide what you're allowed to do based on what type of user you are. So for example, we're all looking at the lesson 6 folder in Blackboard. We're looking at the same physical page, but we know that there are some authorization cues and some code for checking authorization on this page. What are some of the things you see on my screen that would be different from some of the things you see on this same page on your screen? Yeah, so I've got edit mode. So I can toggle this. That's right, Manjinder. So there's an if statement here, right, that checks our authorization level and decides whether to show this or not. Yeah, the ability to actually manage content. So I can, yes, shows the username. So I have the ability to add items here, right? I can build content. You don't have this. So a lot of what we see here, yeah, you don't see, I don't see, well, I do actually see my grades, but I have this grade center. So there's a whole pile of logic, a lot of if statements in the background of this page that shows or hides various components. I mean, we're all authenticated so that we can go in here, right? If I go to a private window where I'm not logged in, I'm not even going to be able to get here, right? So that's that first level of authentication. But once we've authenticated, we see very different things based on our authorization. So visually, this model looks something like this. So we authenticate with identity, with a username, and then typically an authentication type, which is often a password, but it might be a third-party authentication service. We'll do that after reading week, where we authenticate like with a Google or Microsoft account. Then that second level is the roles, and Microsoft stores these identities and roles together in this object called a principal. And we noticed last week that when we create a new project and we check off individual user accounts for authentication, we got this migration to create a whole bunch of tables here that all start with this prefix ASP.NET. And these tables are here so that we can store users, roles, external logins, etc. So this comes with the identity framework. Now we can customize these, but for our purposes, we should be able to work with these pretty much as they are. So actually, I'm just going to let's open up our project from last week. So we'll open up our global grub. And we can see, we did look at this a few weeks ago, but under the data folder and under the migrations, we got this migration called create identity schema. So this is generated automatically by our project, and it creates the tables for roles and users, as well as the other tables that are here. I'll just close everything up. So we're going to work with a few different files and class objects today in terms of adding some authentication. So this identity user, this is a built-in class for managing user identities, for knowing who's logged in. And it gets mapped. Our users are stored in the ASP.NET users table. We've also got an identity role class. So this object is a combination of a particular user and a particular role. And a user could be in multiple roles. And these combinations are stored in this junction table called ASP.NET user roles. So if we look at this relationship, I can just zoom in a bit here. Let's just zoom in a bit at the ERD. So we've got roles. So we may have roles like administrator, customer, supplier, and we have a users table. So there's a many-to-many relationship between ASP.NET users and ASP.NET roles. One user can be in one or more roles, and one role can have one or more users. So we use this junction table, this ASP.NET user roles table here in the middle, to split this many-to-many relationship into a one-to-many here and a one-to-many there. So if one user is in multiple roles, they're going to have two records in ASP.NET user roles. Their user ID twice with the two different role IDs that they're in. We also may need to make a few small changes in our application DB context so we can use the identity user and identity role. We're also going to have to modify our startup file. So right now, we're going to, if we go and look at our startup.cs, we'll make this change later, but it's showing you what we're going to be doing. So identity is configured here, but we're going to make a couple of changes. Number one, as you'll notice, the default setting when a new user signs up is to require them to confirm their identity via email. We're going to toggle that from true to false. We're going to turn that off because we don't have a working mail server we can use. So we're going to turn that off. The other thing that you'll notice is we're going to add this. Startup.cs, it's right in the root of the project. The code that's here, right, it's adding identity management for users, but by default, it doesn't include the role management. So this line in blue, we also want it to manage the roles. So we need to basically turn on the role management with this line. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to have to modify that, which we will do in a bit. And then, so how do we actually implement security checks on resources? Once things are configured, the actual code for adding access control is really simple. If we want to make a controller, either the whole class or a single method, if we want to make it available only to someone who has been logged in, we would just add the authorize annotation at either the method level or the controller at the controller level. This would mean that only somebody logged in could access that method or controller. We could override it with allow anonymous. And then to do a check in our view, let's say we wanted to show or hide a component, depending on whether our user was logged in or not, we could just use the user.identity.isAuthenticated property. And this would tell us at runtime whether our user is logged in or not. So we'll experiment with these code constructs. So this is basically how we will check the authentication piece. So this isn't, remember this, as Attila said, this isn't about roles and permissions. This is simply about identity. Is the user logged in? Is the user anonymous? At the second level, if we want to check the role, in our controller, we use authorize, we still use authorize, and then we can just specify a role or list of roles that have access. If we want to check in our view, we can use if user.identity.isInRole, and then again, we just specify the name of the role. Yeah, it's pretty similar, Scott. Should be pretty similar, I should say. I'm not super familiar with that, but it shouldn't be very different. So what we're going to do is first, we're going to make sure our application is configured properly. And then we'll do some authentication checking first. So we're only dealing with identity. Is the user logged in or not logged in? And then the second level, once we have that working, then we're going to add some authorization where we'll create some roles, create some user accounts in different roles, and then show or hide or control access depending on what role a user is in. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to need to do a little bit of configuring. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is go to our startup. Actually, let's get the project running. We'll load the project. So I'm going to start without debugging. Get our project loading. Okay, so I can go and see my list of categories or my list of products. So this is kind of where we left our site off last week. Now, ultimately, all of these views, or most of them under categories and products, right now, all of this stuff is public, but it shouldn't be, right? Somebody shouldn't be able to come to the website and just modify our product catalog. Only somebody with the right identity and authorization level should be able to do this. So we're going to want to, by the end of the day today, we'll have controlled access. So in order to add, edit, or delete categories or products, someone will have to log in and also be in the right role in order to do this. So in our Solution Explorer, let's open up the startup.cs. This should be the very bottom file in your project. So open up your startup.cs. If you have a whole bunch of other tabs open, because we did open a lot of files last week, you could close them all. You can just right click and choose like close all but this. That way you only have one tab open. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change on line 35, I'm going to change this require confirmed account from true to false. We are not going to require new accounts to be confirmed. So if I go to our project, we've looked at these pages before, but we haven't actually tried them. Right? So I've got a working register form here. Okay, let's try this. We're going to create an account. I'm going to create an account. And just to keep it simple, let's all create the exact same user account so that way we can remember our passwords really easily. So I'm going to try for the email, go to create it as admin@gc.ca. Click on your register link. So the username is admin@gc.ca. Now there are already, the identity library should already be configured to require a strong password. So for example, if I put in, let's say just an A, it says, okay, it's got to be at least 6 characters. So what if I put in A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. Let's try that. B, C, 1, 2, 3. And notice, it says we've got to have at least one special character and at least one uppercase character as well. So these rules are built in for enforcing a strong password. So for the password, we can all use the same password. It'll just keep it simple. We'll use capital T, EST 1, 2, 3, $. I'll put it in the chat. I'm going to recommend we all use the same credential because that way you don't have to worry about remembering. So my username is admin@gc.ca, password test123 $, with a capital T. So then I'll click register. And notice what happens. I get taken back to the home page. Yeah, your browser could remember it, that's true. And now notice in the header, the register and login link have disappeared. It now says hello with my email address, which is actually a link. And now we've got a logout button. So if I click, it actually now takes me to an account settings. Right? I could send a verification. I could change my password. I could add 2-factor. So all this stuff is built in. Could also wipe up, delete my data. So I'm going to go and look in my database now. So I'll go and check my server. And in my global grub tables, if I select my ASP.NET users table, I can just right click it, choose select top 1,000 rows, and it runs the query. And let's see what's here. Right? So notice my ID, it's this long random string. So the IDs are not No, it wasn't. And you're right, Nat, it was a lot of work. So here's our username. The email confirmed is false because we turned that off. It hashes the password. It uses this security stamp. This is like a salt value. This helps ensure uniqueness of the password hashing. If we wanted, we could add our phone number, and our 2-factor right now is disabled, which is fine. And we also have a lockout period. So this is what a user account is going to look like when we're using the identity library. Yep, Jackie, I agree. But I mean, it was way more work to do all this stuff in PHP, but we also learned the mechanics of it by having to do it all manually. So now what I want to do is we want to control access to the controller. So we want it to be, so I'll open up Chrome as well. Probably useful to have a couple different browsers for this. So I'll go here in Chrome. So in Firefox, I'm now logged in. In Chrome, I'm not logged in. So we want to control access to the categories so that only somebody who's logged in can get to this page. So how we do this? Well, if we want to check authentication to make a controller or method available to authenticated users only, we add authorize above that controller. Sorry, Alex, I'm not clear. Why would we want what? Well, because the categories, the ability to create and manage the categories so what we'll do, yes, okay, Alex and Engender, I see what you're saying. There are a couple ways of doing it. You're right. We could make this list public, but restrict access to the create, edit, and delete. That would be fine. I think what I'm going to do is make the whole controller hidden, and we'll create a separate page in a different controller for the public to shop. We'll make a shop controller, and that page will have the main page will be a list of categories, but we'll also use a totally different display. For the admin purposes, just building this as a simple table is easy. We'll make it look nicer. I think last week someone suggested using like a card view. So we'll make a separate page for the shoppers that will be public. But it's not wrong to do it the way you guys are suggesting. Perfectly acceptable. I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. Yeah, we're going to use it. That's great. Alex, you can provide some guidance on card view. So all we need to do is go to our controllers, open up the categories controller. And if I want to make the entire controller private, all we have to do is this. Above the class declaration, all we have to add is the authorize annotation. So I'm going to add line 13, and then Visual Studio is going to tell me I also need to make a reference to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authorization. So let's go ahead and add that reference as well. So we get this reference on line 10. We've got a new annotation at the class level. So now I'll save. And again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to try this again in my two different browsers, because in Firefox, I am authenticated, and in Chrome, I'm anonymous. So we can tell I'm authenticated here in Firefox because it shows me my username and logout. So I'll go to Home, go back to Categories, and I've still got access to navigate around everywhere. Notice now what happens. In Chrome, where I'm an anonymous user, I click Categories, and it takes me to the login screen. It also puts in a return URL. So if I actually did log in, I'll log in and back out. As soon as I log in, it directs me to where I want it to go. If I log out in Chrome, I am blocked. I could try going to create. Doesn't matter. So that whole controller is secured. Just with that one line of code, that one authorize command at the class level. So we can control access to an entire controller with one line. Yes, Alex, we're going to do that in a moment. That's great. I'll also just show you how we could override it. So let's say, so our details view here on line 31 that shows an individual category, this is a read-only page. If I click on details, there's no ability to change anything here. So let's say we want to make the details view public. I know we have no way to get here, but we'll use it later. So above details, we can add allow anonymous. So this will override the security declared at the class level. So just like a variable declared globally, but then redeclared within a method, the local scope will always override the broader scope. So by adding allow anonymous here, if I go back to Chrome where I'm not logged in, I can go categories, browse to categories / details and put in a number, and it will let me in here. So I can see this view. If I click edit, though, I won't have I will be locked. So if I click on edit, it now sends me back to the login screen. So we can use allow anonymous if most of our controller should be private, but we have a few methods inside that we want to make public. We can just use allow anonymous. Basically means make this method only public. Just this method public. So Alex, you are right. We do want to do that now quickly before we have a break. If I'm not logged in and I have no access to the categories, we should add some logic in our layout file to show or hide this link. How are we going to do this? We're going to check for authentication with this if statement. If our user.identity is authenticated. So we're going to wrap that categories link inside of this if condition. Let's open up the views, shared, and layout. So I'm going to take this list item with our categories link. So if our user is authenticated, I'm going to move that list item inside. So when the user is logged in, they'll see the link. If the user isn't logged in, they don't even see that link. So now in Chrome, where I'm not logged in, right, I don't even see the categories link. I agree, Alex. In Firefox, I am logged in, so I can see this. So this is part of what you'll be doing with your assignment 3. You'll be taking assignment 2 and implementing some of these kinds of security changes. Because right now for assignment 2, everything's public. Anybody can perform CRUD operations. So we're going to add some access controls for assignment 3. I don't know, Scott. It's been absolutely ages since I've worked with Java for the web, like almost 20 years. So I couldn't tell you. Okay, so you can see how we've added, what have we added? We added 3 lines of code to this project. Yeah. We've added 3 or 4 lines of code, and we already have this security working because when we set up the project, we included individual user accounts. So Microsoft Identity is doing most of the heavy lifting for us. We're just leveraging some of the features that come with that library. Okay, I will push these changes. I know they weren't a lot, but I'll push them up to GitHub now. So lesson 6 part 1, so basic auth. So changes are up on GitHub. Keep in mind, I'm using my local database. So if you pull down the project, you'll need to change your database connection to use your own database. It's 11:52. My voice seems to be dying already. So let's take a 10-minute break here. We'll come back 11:53. We'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll do some more with this.